They laughed when the CEO adopted 7 disabled girls. Years later, they were begging for mercy. He was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, until one decision changed everything. Instead of chasing more money, he adopted 7 disabled black girls the world had thrown away. The board mocked him. The media destroyed him. Investors turned their backs. And in a single week, he lost his job, his fortune, and his future. Everyone thought his life was over. But what they didn't know was that behind closed doors, he was teaching those girls something far more dangerous than profit: leadership, compassion, faith. Years later, when the world collapses and millions are desperate for help, only one organization can save them, and it's run by the very girls they once laughed at. Now the people who ruined him are on their knees, begging the daughters they ignored to save them. But when mercy is finally in their hands, will they give it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The rain drummed steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Samuel Reed's 40th floor office, creating a soothing backdrop to his morning routine. His leather chair creaked softly as he leaned forward, studying the quarterly reports spread across his polished mahogany desk. The numbers were impressive, record profits for the 3rd quarter in a row. Yet somehow, the achievement felt hollow. Samuel's reflection ghosted in the rain-streaked glass, silver threading through his dark hair, fine lines etching the corners of his eyes. At 52, he had everything society said should make him happy: the corner office, the penthouse apartment, the carefully managed investment portfolio, everything except what mattered most. His gaze drifted to the single framed photo on his desk, Sarah's smile forever frozen in time, her eyes bright with life just months before the cancer took her. 5 years had passed, but the silence in his apartment still felt wrong. The empty space beside him in bed still ached. "Mr. Reed?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The church charity liaison is here for your 2 o'clock. Samuel straightened his tie, grateful for the interruption from his thoughts. "Send her in, please." The liaison was a quiet woman with kind eyes and practical shoes. She carried a worn leather portfolio and spoke without pretense. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Reed. We appreciate your company's continued support of our community outreach programs." "Of course." Samuel gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I understand you wanted to discuss a specific facility." She nodded, opening her portfolio. "The State Care Center on Mason Street. It's struggling. Budget cuts have hit them particularly hard this year." Something in her tone made Samuel look up sharply. "How bad is it?" "I think you need to see for yourself." She met his eyes steadily. "Would you be willing to visit the facility this afternoon?" "It's only 20 minutes from here." Samuel glanced at his calendar, then back at the rain-blurred city beyond his windows. He had lived in this city for 30 years, but he had never set foot in that part of town. "I can make time." The State Care Center crouched at the end of a cracked parking lot, its brick facade grimy with neglect. Samuel parked his Mercedes between faded lines, noting the peeling paint on the entrance sign. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the linoleum floors bore scuff marks from countless wheelchairs. The facility director met them in the lobby, his tie loose and his shirt sleeves rolled up. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. We're honored to have someone of your position take an interest." As they walked the halls, Samuel noticed everything the director wasn't pointing out: the water stains on the ceiling tiles, the broken vending machine, the understaffed nurses' station where one overwhelmed woman juggled multiple ringing phones. Then they reached the children's wing. "We have 7 girls here," the director explained, leading them into a community room. Special needs cases. They've been with us between 2 and 8 years. Limited placement options, you understand?" Samuel's steps slowed as he took in the scene before him. 7 girls, ranging from perhaps 6 to 15 years old, were scattered around the room. Each was lost in her own world, one rocking gently in a corner, another methodically arranging and rearranging a set of wooden blocks, a third writing complex mathematical equations on a small whiteboard. "This is destiny," the director said, indicating a girl in a wheelchair who was carefully drawing in a sketchbook. "Remarkable artistic talent, but severe physical limitations. And over there is Marie, brilliant with numbers, but non-verbal autism makes placement challenging. Tamika by the window has perfect pitch, but partial blindness." Samuel barely heard the rest of the introductions. He was watching their faces, seeing past the disabilities to something that made his chest tight. A quiet intelligence, a desperate hunger for connection, a resilience that refused to be dimmed by institutional walls and fluorescent lights. One of the older girls looked up from her book, meeting his gaze with startling directness. In her eyes, Samuel saw a reflection of his own loneliness, his own yearning for purpose beyond profit margins and shareholder reports. The tour continued, but Samuel's mind was already racing ahead, calculating space requirements, medical costs, educational needs. The rational part of his brain listed all the reasons this was impossible: his age, his job, his complete lack of parenting experience. But his heart, so carefully guarded since Sarah's death, had already made its decision. Hours later, Samuel sat in his car in the facility's parking lot, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The windows had fogged up, blurring the building's outline into a smudge of yellow light against the darkening sky. His hands gripped the steering wheel as the magnitude of what he was considering washed over him. 7 girls, 7 brilliant, beautiful, broken lives that the world had pushed into a corner and forgotten. 7 chances to make a difference that mattered more than any business deal he had ever closed. Walking away would be easy. He could write a generous check, earn the gratitude of the facility staff, and return to his orderly life of corporate success and quiet emptiness. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. But as he watched raindrops trace patterns down his windshield, Samuel Reed knew with bone-deep certainty that it would also be the greatest moral failure of his life. The thought of those girls spending one more night in that facility, their potential locked away behind institutional walls, made something in his soul rebel. Sarah would have known what to do. She had always seen straight to the heart of things, had always chosen love over safety, meaning over convenience. In the growing darkness of his car, Samuel could almost hear her voice. "Sometimes the right path is the one that scares you the most." The rain continued its steady rhythm, and Samuel Reed sat motionless behind his steering wheel, knowing that whatever he decided in the next few moments would change not just his life, but 7 others as well. The weight of that responsibility pressed against his chest like a physical thing, both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. In the distance, a door opened briefly, spilling yellow light across the wet parking lot. The sound of children's voices, laughter, a snatch of song, drifted through the rain before the door swung shut again. Samuel closed his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, the silence in his heart didn't feel quite so empty. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Samuel Reed's black sedan pulled into the facility's parking lot again. This time, he wasn't alone. Barbara Chen, his longtime legal counsel, sat in the passenger seat, her briefcase clutched tightly in her lap. "Samuel," she said carefully, "are you absolutely certain about this? The board's opinion isn't my concern right now." Samuel's voice was quiet but firm as he turned off the engine. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his gaze was clear and determined. "I need to know what's legally possible, that's all." The same overwhelmed nurse from yesterday looked up in surprise as they entered. "Mr. Reed, we weren't expecting—" "I'd like to speak with the director," Samuel said. "And then, if possible, I'd like to spend some time with each of the girls, individually." The morning unfolded in a blur of meetings and paperwork. The director's initial shock gave way to cautious hope as Barbara outlined the possibilities of permanent guardianship. Samuel sat quietly through most of it, his attention focused on the muffled sounds of children's voices drifting through the thin walls. Finally, it was time to meet the girls one-on-one. Amani was first. At 15, she was the oldest, her cerebral palsy affecting her movement, but not dimming the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She wheeled herself into the small conference room and fixed Samuel with a skeptical stare. "Why are you really here?" she asked bluntly. Samuel appreciated her directness. "Because I can't walk away knowing you're all still here, but I want to hear what you think about that." Amani's fingers tightened on her wheelchair's armrests. "We're not a charity case, and we're not stupid. People make promises all the time." "I'm not promising anything yet," Samuel said honestly. "I'm here to listen, to understand. Tell me about yourself, Amani. What do you want for your future?" For the next hour, Amani shared her dreams of college, of changing the system from within. Her words came slowly sometimes, fighting past physical limitations, but her mind was quick and fierce. She spoke of protecting the younger girls, of late-night conversations about hope and fear and family. Maria came next, her white cane tapping gently as she found her way to a chair. Despite her legal blindness, she seemed to see right through Samuel's careful composure. "You're afraid," she said softly, "but so are we." Samuel's throat tightened. "Yes, I am afraid. Of failing you all. Of not being enough." Maria's smile was gentle. "Maybe that's exactly why you should try." Emery brought a notebook full of complex patterns and systems, her autism expressing itself in beautiful mathematical precision. She spoke rapidly about infrastructure and efficiency, her hands fluttering with excitement when Samuel showed genuine interest in her ideas. Keisha's interpreter helped bridge the gap as the deaf 12-year-old shared her experiences through sign language. Her expressions were so vivid they hardly needed translation. Her frustration with being ignored, her joy in music she could feel but not hear, her fierce protectiveness of her sisters in spirit. Lena moved carefully, managing her chronic illness with quiet determination. She spoke of organizing the younger girls' medications, of creating systems to help everyone remember their schedules. "We take care of each other," she explained, "because no one else will." Zara didn't speak at all. Her trauma-induced mutism meant their conversation happened through written notes and expressive eyes. But her message was clear. She wanted a real home, not just another institution. Faith, the youngest at 7, approached their meeting with prayer. "I asked God to send someone," she confided, her learning disability making her words careful and measured. "Someone who wouldn't give up on us." By late afternoon, Samuel's notebook was full of names, needs, dreams, and fears. Barbara had compiled a thick folder of legal requirements and potential obstacles. The facility staff hovered uncertainly, caught between hope and disbelief. Finally, Samuel stood before the director's desk one last time. His voice was steady as he said the words that would change 8 lives forever. "I want to begin adoption proceedings for all 7 girls." The director's pen clattered to the desk. "Mr. Reed, the paperwork alone would be—" "I understand the challenges," Samuel said quietly. "But these girls deserve a real home, a real family. I can provide that." "Your position at the company," Barbara began, "will likely be forfeit, yes." Samuel's smile was tired but genuine. Some things matter more than corporate success. The drive home was silent. Barbara still processing the magnitude of what they'd set in motion. Samuel's mind was already racing ahead. Renovations needed, specialists to consult, schools to research. The practical challenges were daunting, but they weren't what kept his hands tight on the steering wheel. It was the trust he'd seen in those young eyes, the fragile hope he could so easily shatter. 7 hearts that had already known too much disappointment. The sun had set by the time Samuel entered his study. The room felt different now, less like a retreat from the world and more like a space waiting to be filled with new purpose. He sank into his leather chair, feeling the weight of the day in every muscle. For the first time in years, Samuel Reed prayed out loud, his whispered words filling the darkened room. "Lord, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough, but these girls, they're worth everything. Help me be what they need. Help me not fail them." The silence that followed felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. Tomorrow would bring mountains of paperwork, difficult conversations with the board, and the beginning of a journey that would reshape every aspect of his life. But for now, in the quiet of his study, Samuel Reed finally felt at peace with the most important decision he would ever make. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mahogany conference table as catering staff arranged elegant place settings for the quarterly shareholder luncheon. Samuel Reed stood at the window of the 42nd floor dining room, watching the city buzz below. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating since he'd submitted the adoption paperwork yesterday. Barbara had already fielded 16 calls from board members. "Are you sure about this timing?" she asked quietly, reviewing his speech notes one last time. "We could delay the announcement, let things settle first." Samuel shook his head. Transparency from the start. No room for speculation or rumors. The room gradually filled with shareholders in expensive suits, their chatter focused on profit margins and market projections. Samuel recognized the familiar faces, people he'd worked with for years, but somehow felt like strangers now. They smiled and nodded, completely unaware that their world was about to shift. At precisely 12:30 in the afternoon, Samuel approached the podium. Cameras flashed as reporters positioned themselves along the back wall. His prepared speech about record profits lay untouched in his breast pocket. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "For 15 years, I've stood before you discussing numbers, revenue, growth, market share. Today, I want to talk about something more important. Family." The room grew still. Samuel continued. "Yesterday, I began proceedings to adopt 7 extraordinary young girls from the state care system. They are disabled. They are black. They have been overlooked by a world too busy counting dollars to see their worth, and they will be my daughters." The silence shattered. Questions erupted from every corner. Flashbulbs exploded. Samuel raised his hand, waiting for quiet. "I understand this news may concern some of you. Yes, this will require adjustments to my role. Yes, there will be challenges. But I believe leading with conscience is more valuable than leading with greed. These girls deserve a father who will put them first." "This is absurd." Harold Matthews, a major stakeholder, stood up. "You can't seriously expect us to accept this publicity stunt." Samuel met his gaze calmly. "It's not a stunt, Harold. It's my family." The next hour dissolved into chaos. Financial reporters rushed to file stories. Social media exploded with hot takes and mockery. Reed's Folly started trending by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The stock price dropped 3 points before lunch was even served. Barbara managed the immediate crisis while Samuel slipped away. He had more important matters to attend to. The renovation crews had worked around the clock for 48 hours, installing ramps, handrails, and safety features throughout the estate. The elevator was fully operational, bedroom modifications complete, medical equipment installed and tested. At 4:30 in the afternoon, a van pulled up to the front entrance. Samuel walked out to meet it, his heart pounding harder than it had in the boardroom. The side door slid open, revealing 7 nervous faces. "Welcome home," he said softly. They entered slowly, taking in their surroundings with varying degrees of wonder and apprehension. Amani helped guide Maria, describing the space in quiet detail. Emery's fingers traced the smooth wooden handrails, testing their stability. Keisha's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the visual safety of escape routes and open spaces. Lena moved carefully, conserving energy but noting the locations of comfortable resting spots. Zara held tight to Faith's hand, both girls unusually quiet even for them. "Would you like to see your rooms?" Samuel asked. "Each one is different, designed for your specific needs, but we can make any changes you want." He led them up in small groups, the new elevator humming smoothly. Each bedroom door bore a nameplate in both text and braille. Inside, the rooms were practical but personal, adjusted bed heights, accessible storage, safety features seamlessly integrated into cheerful decor. My own room?" Faith whispered, touching the soft blankets on her bed. "Your own space," Samuel confirmed. "Safe, private, yours." Tears slid down several faces. Samuel pretended not to notice, giving them time to process. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Board members, reporters, angry investors. He ignored them all. At 6 o'clock, they gathered in the dining room. The table had been carefully arranged to accommodate everyone's needs, specially designed plates and utensils, comfortable seating heights, clear sight lines for lip reading. The chef had prepared simple, familiar foods for this first night, nothing too overwhelming. The silence as they began eating was heavy with uncertainty. Samuel didn't push conversation. He knew trust would take time. For now, it was enough that they were here, safe, together. He watched them carefully manage utensils, help each other with difficult items, slowly relax into the simple act of sharing a meal. Halfway through dinner, his phone lit up with a news alert. The stock had closed down 6 points. Social media was ruthless. Former colleagues were giving scathing interviews about his mental state and fitness to lead. Samuel switched off his phone and set it aside. The only opinions that mattered were those of the 7 young souls around his table, cautiously building the foundations of family one careful bite at a time. Later, as the girls settled into their new rooms, Samuel stood in the hallway, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of life filling his once empty home. Quiet voices drifted through doors. Gentle footsteps explored new spaces. The soft whir of medical equipment meant safety rather than institutional sterility. In his pocket, the silenced phone held hundreds of messages demanding explanations, threatening consequences, predicting disaster. But here in this hallway, watching night lights glow beneath 7 doors, Samuel Reed knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, his daughters were home. The morning sun filtered through the conference room windows at Reed Industries headquarters, illuminating rows of expectant faces. Camera crews jostled for position, their equipment humming softly. Reporters tapped away on laptops, already crafting opening lines about the CEO who had seemingly lost his mind. Samuel Reed stood quietly at the podium, reviewing his notes one final time. His crisp navy suit and calm demeanor betrayed nothing of his sleepless night. The 7 empty chairs arranged behind him spoke volumes. He had deliberately chosen to keep his daughters away from this media circus. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I appreciate you all coming here today. There has been considerable speculation about my recent decision to adopt 7 extraordinary young women. I'd like to address that directly." He paused, making eye contact with several familiar faces in the crowd. Barbara, his PR director, stood tensely in the corner, ready to intervene if needed. The air felt charged with anticipation. "These girls are not a charity project," Samuel continued. "They are not a publicity stunt or a social experiment. They are my daughters. And as of yesterday morning, they are also the legal heirs to Reed Industries and my entire estate." The room erupted. Cameras flashed frantically. Reporters shot to their feet, shouting questions. Samuel raised his hand, waiting for quiet to return. "Each of these young women possesses remarkable capabilities that have been overlooked by a system focused only on their limitations. Over the next several years, they will receive specialized education in business leadership, ethical decision-making, and corporate stewardship." He pulled out a folder, opening it deliberately. "Amani's strategic thinking rivals any analyst I've ever employed. Maria's ability to detect patterns and solve complex problems is extraordinary. Emery's emotional intelligence and talent for mediation would be invaluable in any boardroom. Keisha's determination and adaptability are exactly what successful leadership requires. Lena's perspective on accessible design could revolutionize how we develop products. Zara's gift for numbers and Faith's intuitive understanding of human nature, these are strengths, not disabilities." The questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Reed, what about shareholder concerns? How can disabled teenagers possibly run a corporation? Is this some kind of joke?" Samuel addressed each question with unwavering patience. The same shareholders who celebrate profit over purpose might question this decision. "But I believe true leadership isn't about maximizing quarterly returns. It's about creating lasting positive change. My daughters will bring perspectives and insights that our boardrooms desperately need." In the third row, Harold Matthews's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Several board members were already on their phones, furiously texting. Barbara had her head in her hands. "I understand this announcement may shock many of you," Samuel continued. "Change often does. But I want to be very clear. This is not a decision I will reverse. These young women are my family, my heirs, and the future of Reed Industries. They will be educated, mentored, and prepared to lead with compassion, integrity, and wisdom." He straightened his papers, preparing to conclude. "For those questioning their capabilities, I suggest you examine your own prejudices. For those concerned about the company's future, I invite you to watch what happens when leadership is driven by purpose rather than profit alone. Thank you for your time." The chaos that followed his exit was deafening. Barbara rushed after him, clutching her tablet. "Samuel, the stock is already down another 4 points. The board is calling an emergency meeting. This is exactly what I expected," he finished, loosening his tie as they walked. "They'll meet, they'll panic, and they'll try to force me out. It's fine, Barbara." "Fine?" She stopped in her tracks. "How is any of this fine?" Samuel turned to face her, his expression gentle but determined. "Because some things matter more than stock prices." The emergency board meeting convened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The usual polished mahogany conference room felt more like a war room, with attorneys present and tension thick in the air. Samuel sat calmly at the head of the table, watching his fellow board members file in with varying degrees of barely contained fury. "This is corporate suicide," Gerald Thompson began without preamble. "You've lost your mind, Reed." "What I've lost," Samuel replied evenly, "is my tolerance for putting profits above people." For 3 hours, they argued. Voices rose and fell, legal precedents were cited, threats were made. Throughout it all, Samuel remained steady, responding to each challenge with quiet conviction. "The shareholders will revolt." "Then let them sell. The media is having a field day." "Good. Let them watch what happens next. You can't possibly expect disabled teenagers to run this company. I expect them to run it better than we have." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the conference room floor. The board's attorney slid a document across the table. "This is a formal notice, Samuel. Either reconsider this absurd scheme or tender your resignation." Samuel picked up the paper, reading it carefully. The legal language was precise, the threat clear. His colleagues watched, certain he would finally back down. Instead, he folded the notice precisely and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," he said, standing. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get home. It's my daughter's first proper family dinner tonight." He left them sitting there, stunned and seething. Walking to his car in the growing darkness, Samuel felt lighter than he had in years. The notice in his pocket carried the weight of his entire career, everything he'd built. But ahead of him lay something far more precious, the chance to build something that truly mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Amani. "Did you tell them about us?" "Yes," he replied. "They're not happy." After a moment, another message appeared. "Are you okay?" Samuel smiled, typing back, "Never better. See you soon." The parking garage was nearly empty now, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more challenges, more attempts to force his hand. But tonight he had 7 daughters waiting at home, 7 brilliant minds ready to learn, 7 hearts beginning to trust, 7 futures full of possibility. The notice in his pocket couldn't change that. Nothing could. The next 48 hours unfolded like a slow-motion crash. Samuel watched it all with a strange sense of peace, even as his professional world crumbled around him. In the grand boardroom, where he'd spent countless hours negotiating deals, he now sat across from people he'd known for years, watching them transform into strangers. "Be reasonable, Samuel," Leonard Porter, the head of legal affairs, pleaded during their 3rd emergency session. "Nobody's asking you to abandon these girls completely. Set up a trust fund, be a mentor, whatever you need to do. But this air nonsense has to stop." Samuel looked around the table at the faces he'd worked alongside for over 2 decades. Barbara wouldn't meet his eyes. Gerald kept checking his phone, probably watching the stock price continue its downward spiral. These people had been his colleagues, his peers, his friends. Or so he'd thought. "I've been reasonable for 25 years," Samuel replied quietly. "I've compromised, adjusted, adapted to keep this machine running smoothly. But not this time. Not with my daughters' futures." The word daughters made several board members visibly wince. "Then you leave us no choice." Leonard slid another document across the table. "This is your final notice. Dissolve the adoptions by Friday, or the board will move to remove you." Samuel didn't even pick up the paper. No. The next morning, he made his position public. Standing before a forest of microphones outside Reed Industries headquarters, Samuel spoke clearly and calmly. "I will not dissolve these adoptions. These 7 young women are my daughters and heirs. If the board wishes to remove me for putting family above profits, that is their choice to make." By Thursday afternoon, his corporate email was disabled, his security clearance revoked. His company phone went dark. The board moved with ruthless efficiency, freezing his accounts and launching a PR campaign painting him as unstable, reckless, unfit to lead. From the windows of Samuel's estate, the girls watched as news vans began gathering at the gates like vultures. Reporters shouted questions whenever anyone came into view. Camera flashes lit up the growing darkness like lightning. "They're saying awful things about you on TV," Keisha said quietly, watching another news crew set up their equipment. Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "People often say awful things when they're afraid of change." "Are you afraid?" Zara asked from her wheelchair. "Not of them," Samuel answered honestly. "Only of failing you girls." That evening, as the media circus outside grew larger, Samuel gathered all 7 girls in the living room. They settled into the oversized sofas and chairs, some perched nervously on edges, others curled up tight. Maria sat closest to him, her unseeing eyes turned toward his voice. "I need to tell you the truth about what's happening," Samuel began. "The board has removed me as CEO. My accounts are frozen. My reputation." He managed a small laugh. "Well, that's probably beyond repair at this point." He looked at each of their faces, these 7 precious lives he'd chosen above everything else. "I've lost almost everything I built over the last 25 years. The company, the influence, the money. It's all gone, or soon will be." The room was silent except for the distant sound of cameras clicking outside the windows. Then Maria reached out, finding his hand with perfect accuracy despite her blindness. Her fingers wrapped around his with surprising strength. "Dad," she said, the word falling into the quiet room like a stone into still water. It was the first time any of them had called him that. "We never wanted your money or your company. We just wanted a family." Samuel's throat tightened as the other girls moved closer, forming a circle around him. Amani laid her head on his shoulder. Lena gripped his other hand. Faith curled up at his feet like a cat. "The reporters keep asking if we're worth losing everything for," Emery said softly. "Are we?" "Oh, my dear girls," Samuel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're worth so much more than anything I've lost. You're my greatest gain." The next morning, Samuel contacted his realtor. The estate would have to be sold. It was too expensive to maintain without his former income, too exposed to the media's constant surveillance. As he signed the listing papers, he felt no regret. The mansion had never truly been home anyway, just an elaborate storage space for his loneliness. That afternoon, while the girls packed their rooms, Barbara showed up at the service entrance, slipping past the reporters. Her face was drawn with worry and guilt. "The board is planning to contest the adoptions," she warned. "They're building a case that you're mentally unfit." Samuel nodded, unsurprised. "Let them try. Some battles aren't won in boardrooms or courtrooms, Barbara. Some are won simply by living well." She looked around the half-packed house, at the boxes labeled in different handwritings, at the wheelchair ramps he'd had installed, at the signs of 7 unique lives already woven into the fabric of the space. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet." Samuel replied, "Somewhere they can grow without cameras in their faces. Somewhere we can be a family." Barbara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Samuel. I should have stood up for you." "There's still time to stand up for what's right," he said gently. "It doesn't have to be today." As evening fell, Samuel stood in his study one last time. The room that had once symbolized his power now felt like a museum piece. Beautiful, but lifeless. Through the window he could see his daughters in the garden, helping each other gather the last herbs from Maria's sensory garden to transplant to their new home. Amani was signing something to Zara, making her laugh. Keisha and Lena were carefully wrapping ceramic pots in newspaper. Faith was testing the soil in each container, ensuring it was just right. Emery was making a detailed list of every plant and its needs, and Maria was gently touching each leaf and flower, memorizing their shapes one last time. Samuel turned away from his mahogany desk, his wall of achievements, his life's work in frames and plaques. None of it mattered anymore. Out there in the garden was everything that counted. 7 hearts learning to trust, 7 minds learning to soar, 7 souls learning to believe in family again. He had lost his empire, but found his kingdom. Lost his fortune, but found his wealth. Lost his position, but found his purpose. It was the best trade he'd ever made. The gravel driveway crunched under the wheels of their modest minivan, as Samuel pulled up to their new home. The two-story farmhouse stood quietly against the autumn sky, its white paint weathered but welcoming. A wooden ramp, freshly built, curved gently up to the wide front porch. "It's so quiet," Keisha whispered, pressing her face against the window. After weeks of camera flashes and shouting reporters, the rural silence felt almost supernatural. Samuel helped each girl out of the van carefully. Maria's cane tapped experimentally against the gravel as she oriented herself. Zara's wheelchair rolled smoothly up the new ramp, though she wrinkled her nose at the unfamiliar creaks of the wooden boards. "It smells different here," Lena observed, her heightened senses taking in the mix of pine trees and freshly cut grass. "Like space." The inside of the house was simple but thoughtfully modified. Wide doorways accommodated wheelchairs. Textured strips marked transitions between rooms for Maria. Labels in both braille and large print identified everything from light switches to cabinet contents. "Your rooms are upstairs," Samuel explained. "Except for Zara's, which is here on the main floor. We'll need to work together to make this place feel like home." That first night, nothing worked quite right. The ancient water heater sputtered and died halfway through showers. The electricity flickered during dinner, sending momentary panic through girls who had spent too long in institutional darkness. The internet connection, essential for their distance learning programs, crawled at a snail's pace. Samuel found himself in the basement at 11 o'clock at night, watching YouTube tutorials on how to restart a water heater while his phone's flashlight cast strange shadows on the stone walls. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. The former CEO who had commanded boardrooms was now battling ancient plumbing. "Need help?" Emery's voice startled him. She stood on the basement stairs, her tablet glowing in the darkness. "I thought you were asleep," Samuel said. "Too different." She shrugged. "But I found the manual for this model online. Want me to read it to you?" Together, they got the water heater working again. As they climbed the stairs, Emery paused. "You know we don't mind if everything isn't perfect, right? We're used to worse." Samuel's heart clenched at her words. You shouldn't have to be used to worse. The next morning, Samuel began their first homeschool session around the large kitchen table. Each girl had unique educational needs that the local schools weren't equipped to handle. He had spent weeks researching curricula and coordinating with specialized tutors who could video conference in. "Today," he announced, "we're going to start with something different." He passed out notebooks. "I want you to write down 3 things. What you're most afraid of in this new life, what you're most excited about, and what you hope to learn." "Can I type mine?" Maria asked, gesturing to her adaptive computer. "Of course. Whatever works best for you." As they shared their answers, Samuel's eyes grew damp. Their fears were heartbreaking in their simplicity. Being sent back, being separated, not being good enough. Their hopes were equally touching. To have real birthdays, to learn to cook, to help others someday. The power went out again during their math lesson, but this time they were ready. Samuel had stocked up on battery-powered lanterns, and they turned the blackout into an impromptu lesson about electrical grids and infrastructure. That evening, a specialized occupational therapist arrived to help set up adaptive equipment and train Samuel in proper transfer techniques for Zara. The therapist, Ms. Rodriguez, watched approvingly as Samuel took careful notes. "Most parents don't pay this much attention," she commented. "I'm still learning," Samuel replied. "I want to do this right." Weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and learning. Samuel discovered that each girl had hidden talents that flourished with individual attention. Amani, who barely spoke, turned out to be a gifted artist when given the right tools. Faith, who struggled with traditional academics, had an almost supernatural ability with plants, and started a small garden. But there were hard days too. Days when the internet crashed during important therapy sessions. Days when the well pump failed and they had to haul water from their neighbors. Days when the girl's past trauma surfaced in nightmares and tears. One particularly challenging afternoon, Samuel found himself sitting on the porch steps, exhausted. He had spent the morning helping Maria navigate a new text-to-speech program, the afternoon dealing with a backed-up septic system, and the evening trying to calm Lena through a panic attack triggered by a thunderstorm. Looking out at the darkening sky, he remembered his corner office with its climate control and ergonomic chair. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all he had given up. Then the screen door creaked behind him. 7 girls, in various states of pajama-clad readiness for bed, crowded onto the porch. "It's prayer time," Keisha reminded him. It had become their nightly ritual, gathering to share thanks and concerns before bed. They formed their usual circle, some in chairs, some on cushions, all connected by clasped hands. One by one, they offered their prayers, for each other, for their new home, for the strength to face tomorrow's challenges. When it was Samuel's turn, he paused, looking at each face in the circle. These weren't employees to command or shareholders to impress. These were his daughters, each one precious, each one teaching him daily what true leadership meant. "Thank you," he prayed simply, "for showing me that real strength isn't in controlling things, but in serving others. Thank you for teaching me that true leadership isn't about power, it's about love." Later, after tucking everyone in and checking the locks one last time, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with his lesson plans for tomorrow. The house creaked and settled around him, no longer strange but comfortingly familiar. Through the window he could see the stars, so much brighter here than in the city. A small noise made him turn. Maria stood in the doorway in her nightgown, her unseeing eyes somehow finding him unerringly. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I was thinking about something Ms. Rodriguez said today, about how you're different from most parents because you take such careful notes and pay attention to everything." Samuel waited, knowing there was more. "You were already a leader before," Maria continued. "A big important one. But now you're learning all these small things. How to help Zara transfer safely, how to read Braille with me, how to calm Lena's anxiety attacks. You're not less of a leader now. You're just leading differently." Samuel got up and hugged her, his heart full. "The best kind of leading," he whispered, "is the kind that helps others grow." The months flowed together like watercolors on wet paper, each day bleeding into the next as their new life took shape. The old grandfather clock in the hallway marked time with steady chimes, witnessing their daily rhythms and small victories. Morning routines became familiar choreography. Samuel would wake before dawn to start breakfast, the smell of oatmeal and toast drawing sleepy girls from their rooms. Zara needed help with morning care, while Lena required extra time to process the day's schedule. Faith tended her growing garden, marking the seasons with new seedlings and harvests. In the makeshift classroom that had once been a dining room, 7 distinct learning styles emerged. Samuel adapted, learning to present information in ways that reached each child. For Emery, it was all about patterns and systems. She struggled with the social elements of their lessons, but lit up when given practical problems to solve. One rainy afternoon, Samuel found Emery hunched over several old laptops he'd managed to salvage from a local repair shop. Her fingers flew across the keyboards, eyes intense with concentration. "What are you working on?" he asked, careful not to break her focus. "A model," she replied without looking up. "For food distribution. Like how we get our groceries, but bigger, for lots of people." Samuel pulled up a chair, intrigued. On the screens, Emery had created a basic but impressive network of points and lines, each representing stores, warehouses, and delivery routes. "See, if we map it this way," she explained, her words tumbling out faster as excitement overcame her usual reserve, "we can show how to move things more efficiently. Less waste, fewer trucks driving empty." It wasn't perfect. The software was outdated, the processing slow, but Samuel recognized the spark of genuine innovation. "This is remarkable, Emery. You're thinking about helping people on a large scale." A tiny smile crossed her face. "The system now is inefficient. I can make it better." In the corner of their classroom, Maria had created her own sacred space. A small desk held her Braille Bible and audio equipment, where she spent hours absorbing scripture through touch and sound. Her gentle voice often filled the house with verses that seemed perfectly chosen for whatever challenge they faced. One particularly difficult morning, when the heating system failed and tempers ran short, Maria's clear voice cut through the chaos. "Be patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." The words settled over them like a warm blanket, calming frayed nerves. It wasn't just the verses themselves, but the way Maria lived them, her quiet strength and unwavering faith providing an anchor for the whole family. But not everyone found peace so easily. Amani, sharp-minded and perceptive, carried her anger like armor. Samuel would often find her at the window of her bedroom, staring at the distant road, as if it might lead back to their old life. The tension built slowly, like storm clouds gathering. It broke one evening in late autumn, after a day when everything seemed to go wrong. The internet had cut out during Keisha's online therapy session. The van had needed expensive repairs. Dinner was late and simple, beans and rice again. Amani pushed her plate away, her face tight with emotion. "We didn't have to live like this." The table fell silent. Samuel set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "You're right, we didn't have to. You had money?" she continued, her voice rising slightly. "Power, influence. You could have helped us without—" She gestured at their surroundings. "All this, without losing everything." Samuel considered her words carefully. Around the table, the other girls watched, equally invested in his answer. This wasn't just Amani's question. It was a doubt they'd all carried. "Let me ask you something," he said gently. "When you were in the facility, what did you need most? Money? Better food? Newer clothes?" Amani's jaw tightened, but she answered honestly. "Someone to see us, to choose us, to—" Her voice cracked slightly. "To stay." Samuel nodded. "And if I had just donated money, or set up a foundation, or made speeches about helping, would that have given you what you really needed?" "No," she whispered. "I could have chosen an easier path." Samuel continued, his voice steady and sure. "I could have written checks and felt good about myself, but easy choices rarely change anything fundamental. Easy choices don't save people." He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. What you needed, what the world needs, isn't just resources. It's relationship. It's people willing to step down from comfortable places and walk alongside those who've been overlooked. It's leaders who understand that true power isn't about control or comfort. It's about sacrifice and service. Maria's hand found his across the table. "Like Jesus," she said softly. "He could have stayed in heaven, but he chose to come down and live among us." Amani was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, she picked up her fork again. "I still miss the big house sometimes," she admitted. "That's okay," Samuel assured her. "I do too, but I wouldn't trade this, any of this, for all the corner offices in the world." The evening settled into more comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of 7 girls and their father sharing a simple meal. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through trees that had yet to learn their names, but would, like everything else in this new life, become part of their story, their journey, their redemption. Through the window, the first stars appeared, bright and clear in the rural sky. They seemed closer here, more attainable, as if the very act of reaching higher had somehow brought heaven nearer to earth. The seasons changed slowly, painting their rural sanctuary with autumn's gold before blanketing it in winter white. As spring emerged, Samuel's dedication to his daughter's education took on new urgency. He spent countless hours at his desk, surrounded by grant applications and scholarship forms, his computer screen glowing late into the night. "There's so much untapped potential," he explained to their educational consultant over a video call. "We just need to find the right opportunities that accommodate their unique needs." His persistence paid off. By early summer, acceptance letters and grant approvals began arriving. Each one represented a carefully crafted pathway, designed to nurture each girl's distinct gifts. Keisha's journey proved particularly remarkable. Her fluency in American Sign Language had always been more than just communication. It was artistry in motion. Samuel noticed how others naturally gravitated toward her calm presence and expressive hands. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, Samuel presented Keisha with an opportunity. The Regional Nonprofit Alliance needs an ASL interpreter for their board meetings, he explained, writing the words as he spoke them. "Would you be interested?" Keisha's eyes lit up, her hands moving gracefully as she signed her response. Samuel had learned enough ASL to understand her enthusiasm, though she also typed on her tablet. "Really? But I'm only 17. "Age doesn't determine ability," Samuel replied, "both speaking and signing. You have a gift for bridging worlds." The first board meeting proved challenging. Keisha sat nervously at the conference table, surrounded by executives in business attire. But as discussions unfolded, something remarkable happened. Her interpretations weren't just literal. She conveyed nuance, emotion, and intent. She helped deaf community members understand not just words, but the heart behind them. "Your daughter has an extraordinary gift," the board chair told Samuel afterward. "She doesn't just translate language, she translates understanding." Over the following months, Keisha's reputation grew. Organizations specifically requested her services, recognizing that her presence made their meetings more inclusive and effective. She began teaching basic ASL to interested board members, building bridges between communities that had long been separated by silence. Meanwhile, Zara's transformation unfolded more quietly. Her trauma-induced mutism had left her silent, but not voiceless. Samuel provided her with beautiful journals, their pages waiting patiently for her thoughts. At first, her entries were sparse, simple observations about daily life. But gradually, they deepened. She wrote about feelings she couldn't speak, dreams she dared to imagine, and increasingly about others who needed help. One entry particularly moved Samuel. "Sometimes the loudest cry for help is silence. I know because I live there, but silence doesn't mean empty. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to become song." Samuel encouraged Zara to share her writings with local community organizations. Her words resonated deeply, especially with groups working with trauma survivors. Soon, she was invited to contribute to their newsletters and outreach materials. The first time Zara spoke aloud, it was to answer a question from a young girl at a community center. The child had asked why Zara always wrote instead of talked. In a voice soft but clear, Zara answered, "Sometimes we need to find our words before we can find our voice." The room had fallen silent, not from shock, but from recognition of the moment's significance. Zara's journey from silence to speech became a powerful testimony, inspiring others who struggled to be heard. As summer turned to autumn again, all 7 girls discovered various ways to serve their new community. Maria organized a reading program where she shared her love of scripture through both braille and audio recordings. Emery used her growing computer skills to help small non-profits optimize their operations. Faith, with her gift for mathematics, tutored struggling students at the local library. Their disabilities, once seen as limitations, became unique perspectives that enhanced their ability to lead and serve. They understood challenges that others overlooked, saw solutions where others saw obstacles. One evening, as they gathered for their daily family meeting, Amani made an observation that captured their journey. "Remember when people said we needed to be fixed? But maybe we were never broken. Maybe we just needed the chance to show how being different makes us better leaders." Samuel watched with quiet pride as his daughters grew into their roles. The same qualities that society had once dismissed: Keisha's deafness, Zara's silence, Maria's blindness, became powerful tools for understanding and helping others. They received an invitation to speak at a local leadership conference. The topic: Redefining Ability in Leadership. The girls prepared their presentations with characteristic thoroughness. Keisha would sign while others spoke. Zara would share excerpts from her journal. Each would demonstrate how their supposed limitations had become their greatest strengths. The morning of the conference, Samuel gathered them in their living room for a moment of reflection. The space was so different from his former executive office, smaller, humbler, but filled with more purpose and joy than those glass walls had ever contained. "Remember," he told them, "true leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to ask different questions. Your experiences, your challenges, your unique ways of moving through the world. These aren't obstacles to overcome. They're perspectives that the world desperately needs." The girls nodded, understanding deep in their bones what Samuel had known that first day at the facility, that leadership comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones society has tried hardest to silence. As they prepared to leave for the conference, Samuel watched his daughters help each other with last-minute adjustments, Keisha signing encouragement to Maria, Zara squeezing Emery's hand, Faith double-checking everyone's presentations. They moved with the confidence of young women who knew their worth, who understood that their differences were their strength. In this moment, seeing them support each other with such natural grace, Samuel realized they had discovered something profound. Leadership wasn't about power or position. It was about presence, understanding, and the courage to be authentically oneself in service to others. The rural home that had once seemed like a step down from his executive life now felt like holy ground, a place where true leadership was being refined and redefined, where 7 extraordinary girls were discovering that their supposed limitations were actually gateways to deeper understanding and more meaningful impact. Their story was far from over, but as they headed out into the crisp autumn morning, their purpose was clear. They weren't just overcoming obstacles, they were transforming them into bridges for others to cross. The seasons passed like turning pages, each one marking quiet growth and deepening bonds. Spring brought new possibilities, summer solidified their resolve, autumn tested their resources, and winter taught them resilience. Through it all, Samuel watched his daughters transform from uncertain teenagers into purposeful young women. 5 years after leaving his corporate life behind, Samuel sat at their worn kitchen table, reviewing budgets while snow fell softly outside. Their modest home had become a hub of focused activity, with each room serving multiple purposes. The living room doubled as a meeting space, bedrooms functioned as offices, and their basement housed a small but efficient command center of computers and communications equipment. "Dad." Emery called from her workstation, her voice carrying that familiar tone of concentrated excitement. "I think I've found something important in these supply chain patterns." Samuel looked up, noting how his daughter had grown from the quiet, system-focused girl he'd first met into a young woman whose mind could unravel complex logistical puzzles like others read simple stories. Her autism gave her a unique perspective on patterns that others missed entirely. Their small non-profit, Sustainable Emergency Logistics and Solutions, SELS, operated on a shoestring budget, but with unwavering dedication. Samuel had invested his remaining savings, carefully stretching every dollar while teaching his daughters the intricacies of ethical business operations. "Show me," he said, moving to join her at the computer setup she'd pieced together from donated parts and carefully upgraded components. Emery's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up maps and data streams. "Look at how traditional emergency response systems fail when multiple crises hit simultaneously. But if we restructure the approach..." She demonstrated her model, which showed how regional resources could be networked differently. Maria, who had developed an extraordinary memory for verbal information, joined them. "The current systems waste 43% of resources in transit," she recited from a recent report. Emery's model could cut that down to 12%. Samuel watched as his daughters collaborated, each bringing their unique strengths to the work. Keisha had become their primary liaison with partner organizations, her fluency in sign language making their programs more accessible. Zara, who now spoke with quiet confidence, wrote their grant proposals and impact reports. Faith handled their financial projections, while Amani managed community relationships. Lena coordinated their volunteer programs. Their workdays were long but purposeful. Samuel insisted on maintaining balance, regular breaks, family meals, and time for rest. They'd learned the hard way that burnout helped no one. Every evening ended with their traditional family meeting, where victories were celebrated and challenges shared. "The key," Emery explained one spring evening, spreading out her latest diagrams, "is creating resilient networks that can adapt under pressure. Most systems break because they're too rigid." Samuel recognized the parallel to their own journey. They'd survived because they'd learned to be flexible, to adapt rather than break. Their small non-profit might not make headlines, but their impact grew steadily, one community at a time. Summers brought interns, college students eager to learn about ethical supply chain management. The girls took turns mentoring them, passing on the lessons Samuel had taught them about leadership through service. Their modest home buzzed with energy as young minds grappled with real-world challenges. "Remember," Samuel would tell each new group, "profit without purpose is poverty of the soul." The autumn of their 6th year marked a turning point. Emery had been working late into the night for weeks, fueled by the kind of intense focus that only she could maintain. Samuel brought her tea, watching as she refined her models again and again. "It's not just about moving supplies faster," she explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "It's about creating networks that learn and grow stronger under stress, like living things." When she finally presented her completed model, Samuel felt his breath catch. On the screen before them was something revolutionary, a living map of interconnected systems that could adapt and evolve in real time, redirecting resources with unprecedented efficiency. "Show me the scalability," he requested quietly, his heart already knowing what he was seeing. Emery ran the simulations. The model held stable as it expanded from local to regional, regional to national, and beyond. It learned from each crisis, strengthening weak points automatically. It could coordinate thousands of nodes simultaneously, each one supporting the others like a vast web of mutual aid. "This isn't just efficient," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "This could save millions of lives." The other girls gathered around, each understanding the magnitude of what their sister had created. This wasn't just another logistics system. It was a fundamental reimagining of how communities could support each other in times of crisis. "We'll need partners," Maria observed practically. "And extensive testing," added Faith. "Cultural considerations for different regions," Zara pointed out. Samuel watched them problem-solve together, his heart full. These were not the same girls who had once been dismissed as burdens on society. They were leaders, innovators, and most importantly, they were family. As winter approached again, they began the careful work of documenting and testing Emery's model. Samuel knew they were standing on the edge of something world-changing, but he also knew the importance of building strong foundations. "We'll do this right," he assured them. "No shortcuts, no compromises." They worked methodically, refining the model through small-scale implementations, gathering data, making adjustments. Their non-profit remained small, but their vision had grown beyond anything Samuel could have imagined that first day at the care facility. One evening, as snow fell outside their window, Emery looked up from her computers with quiet certainty. "It's ready?" she said simply. Samuel reviewed the final model, taking in its elegant complexity, its robust adaptability, its potential to transform humanitarian response worldwide. In that moment, he saw not just a technological breakthrough, but the fulfillment of a promise he'd made years ago, that these girls would become leaders who could change the world. The world wasn't ready for what they had created, but Samuel knew with absolute certainty that they were ready for the world. The first signs of trouble came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Samuel was reviewing grant applications with Maria when the internet connection suddenly dropped. Not unusual for their rural location, but this time felt different. Their backup systems stayed dark. "Something's wrong," Maria said quietly, her fingers tracing the braille display that had gone static. Within hours, reports began trickling in through emergency radio frequencies. Banks worldwide were shutting down. Payment systems had frozen. Transportation networks were grinding to a halt as digital infrastructure collapsed. Government hotlines went silent. Samuel watched the girls spring into action with practiced precision. Years of drills and preparation hadn't been wasted. Emery's fingers flew across her specialized keyboard, activating their emergency protocols. Keisha began coordinating with their network of sign language interpreters across 3 continents. Lena pulled up their disaster response matrices, while Faith ran financial contingencies. "Status check," Zara called out, her voice strong and clear, years of therapy and trust having helped her find her voice. "Communications hub online," Amani reported from her station. "Backup servers holding." Their modest command center, built in what was once their dining room, hummed with focused energy. The girls moved with the coordinated grace of a team that had trained for years for this exact scenario. Samuel felt a surge of pride through his growing concern. "Multiple hospitals reporting critical supply shortages," Maria announced, her fingers scanning emergency bulletins. "Transportation disruption affecting medical deliveries." "Implementing Protocol 7. Emery responded, activating her adaptive logistics system. The massive display wall showed thousands of nodes lighting up across their network. Small warehouses, community centers, and local partners they'd quietly built relationships with over the years. Hour by hour, the situation deteriorated. Stock markets worldwide suspended trading. Grocery store shelves emptied as panic spread. Fuel stations ran dry. But in communities where their network operated, a different story was unfolding. Medical supplies found their way to hospitals through alternate routes. Food banks received coordinated deliveries. Local power grids stabilized thanks to their decentralized backup systems. Their years of preparation were paying off in ways even Samuel hadn't fully anticipated. We're getting calls from government agencies. Keisha signed excitedly. They want to know how we're still operating. Samuel watched the news coverage late into the night, monitoring multiple screens from his old armchair. Reporters were beginning to notice the pattern. While chaos reigned in most areas, certain communities showed remarkable resilience. The question everyone asked, who was behind it? Dad. Faith called softly, bringing him tea. You should rest, we've got this. But Samuel couldn't rest. His chest felt tight as he watched his girls coordinate emergency responses across continents. They'd built something extraordinary, not just a system, but a new way of thinking about community resilience. The world was finally seeing what he'd seen in them all those years ago. The screens blurred slightly as he tried to focus. The tightness in his chest increased. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't worry the girls. They needed to concentrate. Amani was the first to notice. Dad, are you okay? Samuel tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The room tilted sideways. He heard shouting, Zara calling for help, Maria praying, Emery directing emergency protocols for a different kind of crisis. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was his girls working together, strong and capable, exactly as he'd always known they could be. Then darkness claimed him, and the world went quiet. The stroke hit with devastating force. As emergency responders arrived, coordinated through their own systems, the girls maintained their professional composure, running both their organization's crisis response and their father's medical evacuation simultaneously. Years of handling multiple emergencies had prepared them for this, though none had expected it to become so personal. Keep the systems running. Keisha signed firmly, taking charge of their father's care coordination. He'd want that. Through their tears and fear, they did exactly that. Their network continued to function, adapting and responding to the growing global crisis. Communities supported each other using the frameworks they'd built. Hope spread through their connected nodes like light through darkness. In the hospital waiting room, the 7 sisters held each other, their differences forgotten in their shared fear for the man who had given up everything to believe in them. Outside, the world might have been falling apart, but in that moment they were simply daughters praying for their father. The monitors beeped steadily as Samuel lay unconscious, his girls maintaining their vigil. They took turns, some staying with him while others returned to manage their emergency operations. Their organization couldn't stop, not when so many people were depending on them. Samuel had taught them that leadership meant serving others, especially in the hardest moments. Remember what Dad always says? Maria whispered, her hands finding her sisters in the dim hospital room. We were built for times like these. The world outside continued to spiral into chaos, but within their network, hope held firm. Communities connected through their system supported each other, sharing resources and knowledge. The model they'd built was doing exactly what it was designed to do, helping people find strength in unity rather than fear in isolation. As Samuel fought for his life in the hospital bed, his greatest creation wasn't the organization or the systems they'd built. It was the unshakable bond between 7 extraordinary young women who had once been dismissed as burdens, now standing as beacons of hope in humanity's darkest hour. The machinery continued to beep, marking time in the quiet hospital room, while across the world the network they'd built continued to pulse with life, connecting, supporting, and protecting communities just as Samuel had once protected them. Dawn crept through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the waiting room where 7 sisters huddled together. The antiseptic smell and rhythmic beeping of distant monitors created an unsettling backdrop to their vigil. None of them had slept properly, their phones constantly buzzing with crisis updates from around the world. Amani sat straight-backed in her wheelchair, her tablet balanced carefully on the armrest as she monitored their global response networks. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, coordinating aid deliveries and emergency protocols. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, but she refused to let it show. The hospital physician approached, his face carefully neutral. "Your father's condition is stable, but uncertain," he explained gently. "The stroke was severe. We're doing everything we can, but the next 48 hours will be crucial." Maria reached out, finding Amani's hand in the dim light. "What are his chances?" she asked, her unseeing eyes directed towards the doctor's voice. "It's too early to make any definitive predictions," the physician replied honestly. "The damage was extensive, but Mr. Reed is fighting hard. We'll know more after the next round of tests." A series of urgent notifications lit up their devices simultaneously. More systems were failing globally: power grids, supply chains, communication networks. The world was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated. "We can't stop," Amani declared, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. "Dad built this organization to help people. He'd want us to keep going." The sisters gathered around her, forming an impromptu command center in the sterile hospital waiting room. Emery set up her laptop, monitoring their logistics networks. Keisha began coordinating with their sign language, interpreters worldwide, ensuring clear communication across all channels. Zara and Faith organized their volunteer teams, while Lena managed resource allocation. Maria listened intently to each decision, her spiritual wisdom helping them navigate the complex ethical choices they faced. "Remember," she reminded them softly, "Dad always said profit never comes before people. We help everyone we can, but we do it right." The morning wore on, marked by the steady stream of crisis reports and the quiet prayers they whispered between decisions. Their organization's unique infrastructure was proving invaluable. Where traditional systems failed, their decentralized network held strong. "Emergency request from Singapore," Emery announced. "Their medical supply chain is collapsing. Reroute the Manila shipment," Amani directed. "We can use the backup route through Indonesia." "Food riots starting in 3 major cities," Zara reported, her voice steady despite the gravity of the news. "Deploy our community support teams," Maria advised. "Focus on connecting local resources first." Around midday, an unexpected call came through. Amani's screen displayed a familiar name, one of the former executives who had voted to remove Samuel from his position years ago. The same man who had mockingly dismissed their organization as a charity hobby. The waiting room fell silent as Amani answered, putting the call on speaker. The once powerful voice now trembled with desperation. "Please!" the former executive begged, his arrogance replaced by raw fear. "Our entire network is down. Nothing's working. You're the only one still operating. We need help." Amani's hand tightened on her wheelchair's armrest, years of bitterness threatening to surface. She looked at Maria, whose expression remained serene but thoughtful. "What would Dad do?" Amani whispered to her sister. Maria's answer came without hesitation. "He'd help. Not because they deserve it, but because it's right." Amani took a deep breath, remembering Samuel's lessons about leadership and forgiveness. "We'll send a support team," she told the executive, her voice professional and controlled. "Send us your critical needs list, and sir, remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone's worth by their disabilities." The call ended, leaving them in contemplative silence. Through the window, they could see ambulances arriving, more casualties of the failing infrastructure. But within their network, hope continued to spread. Communities were connecting, supporting each other, proving that Samuel's vision of ethical leadership could work even in the darkest times. The physician returned with updated test results, and they gathered again to hear news of their father. Outside, the world kept unraveling, but in that moment they were simply daughters again, praying for the man who had taught them that true leadership meant serving others, especially those who once cast you aside. Their phones continued to buzz with emergency alerts and desperate pleas for help. There would be time for rest later. For now, they had work to do. Their father's work, their work, the work of healing a broken world, one connection at a time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital waiting room as more urgent requests flooded their screens. Faith watched her sisters' faces tighten with each new message from former executives and political leaders, the very people who had once worked to destroy their father's legacy. Another call from the Western Alliance. Emery announced, her voice strained. Their emergency response systems are completely offline. Estimated 8 million people affected. Amani's hands gripped her wheelchair arms tightly. They're the ones who blocked our aid proposals last year. Said we weren't qualified to handle large-scale operations. Because we're disabled. Keisha signed sharply, her movements reflecting her anger. They didn't think we could lead anything important. Faith wheeled herself to the center of their impromptu command station. I know you're angry, I am too, but people are suffering. Real people, not just the leaders who hurt us. They hurt Dad, Zara whispered, her voice rough with emotion. They took everything from him, mocked him, destroyed his reputation, and now they want our help? The tension in the room was palpable. Lena pulled up archived news footage on her tablet, headlines from years ago flashing across the screen. CEO goes mad. Board forces out unstable leader. Market reacts to Reed's reckless decision. Faith closed her eyes, remembering those dark days. Her learning disability had made it hard to process everything at once, but she'd felt the pain radiating from their father even as he tried to shield them from it. We should pray about this, she suggested quietly. Dad always said the hardest decisions need the most prayer. Maria, who had been sitting silently near the window, turned her unseeing eyes toward her sisters. Faith is right. We need wisdom now more than ever. They formed a circle, hands joined, some flesh, some mechanical assists, all united in purpose. Faith led them in prayer, her words simple but heartfelt. Lord, help us see past our hurt. Show us the right path. Give us your eyes to see, and your heart to love. As they prayed, memories surfaced, Samuel teaching them late into the night, showing them how to turn their unique challenges into strengths, his patient voice explaining that true leadership meant serving even those who didn't deserve it. Remember when Dad helped that journalist? Lena said after they finished praying. The one who wrote that awful article about us? Amani nodded slowly. The man's daughter was sick. Dad arranged specialist care, paid for it privately. Never told anyone. He said something to me that day. Maria shared, her voice thoughtful. He said, Maria, bitterness is a luxury leaders can't afford. Every minute we spend on anger is a minute we're not helping someone. The emergency alerts continued steadily. More regions going dark, more systems failing, more lives hanging in the balance. Faith watched her sisters wrestling with their memories and their mission. What if, she suggested carefully, we help them, but with conditions? We could require public accountability, transparency in their operations, make them acknowledge their past mistakes. Reform through relationship, Maria murmured. That's what Dad always believed in. Keisha's signing became more measured as she considered this. We could document everything, show the world how leadership should work, especially in crisis. The debate continued as afternoon faded into evening. They ordered simple sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria, none of them willing to leave while their father lay unconscious in intensive care. Between bites, they shared more memories, both painful and precious. "Remember when Dad sold his car collection?" Zara asked. "To fund our first community project?" "And his watches?" Amani added. "Everything that wasn't essential he converted to resources for others." Faith wheeled closer to the window, watching ambulances arrive with more victims of the failing infrastructure. "Maybe that's our answer. We help everyone we can, but we do it Dad's way, with dignity, ethics, and clear expectations for change." As night settled over the hospital, Maria spoke into the thoughtful silence. Her words came slowly, weighted with conviction. "We must be better than what broke him. We have to rise above their cruelty, or we risk becoming what we fought against." The statement hung in the air, challenging them all. Faith felt tears well up, recognizing the truth in her sister's words. Their father had given up everything to give them a chance, not just at life, but at leadership, at making real change in the world. Amani finally spoke, her voice heavy with responsibility. "We'll take 24 hours, review each aid request individually, set clear terms for assistance, but we won't turn anyone away without at least hearing them out." The decision wasn't final, but it was a start. Faith could see the subtle softening in her sisters' faces, the gradual lowering of defensive walls built by years of pain. They were their father's daughters, not just in name, but in spirit. And perhaps that was the greatest test of all. Through the night, they continued working, coordinating aid where they could, postponing the harder decisions until they could approach them with clearer hearts. The world outside was still breaking, but in that hospital waiting room, something else was happening. Healing was beginning, not just for their father, but for them all. Dawn broke over the hospital with pale golden light. The 7 sisters had spent the night in prayer and deliberation, their hearts gradually aligning with their father's long-ago lessons of mercy and transformation. As morning arrived, they gathered in the small conference room the hospital had provided for their emergency operations. Amani, her wheelchair positioned at the head of the table, looked at each of her sisters in turn. "Are we all in agreement with the terms?" Maria nodded, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "The terms are firm but fair, just as Dad would want." They had drafted their requirements through the night, balancing accountability with compassion. Keisha's hands moved swiftly as she signed the main points, which Lena translated for the group one final time. First, complete transparency of all past and current operations. Second, immediate resignation of corrupt leadership. Third, public acknowledgement of past wrongs. Fourth, implementation of ethical oversight committees. Fifth, redistribution of hoarded resources to aid distribution. Faith wheeled closer to the table, her voice steady. And most importantly, they must demonstrate genuine remorse and commitment to change, not just with words, but with actions. The global news networks had been waiting anxiously since dawn. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, Amani faced the cameras, her sisters arranged behind her in a show of unified strength. The world watched, desperate for help, as systems continued to collapse. "We are prepared to extend aid," Amani began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Our organization has the infrastructure and resources to help stabilize critical systems. However, our assistance comes with non-negotiable conditions." She outlined their terms, watching as reporters frantically took notes. The requirements were unprecedented. No backdoor deals, no face-saving private arrangements. Everything would happen in the full light of public scrutiny. Those who wish to receive aid must first publicly acknowledge their role in creating this crisis. Amani continued. "We require complete honesty about past corruption, mismanagement, and abuse of power. This includes a full accounting of funds hidden in offshore accounts, which must be surrendered for humanitarian use." The response was immediate. Phones began ringing within minutes. The first to call was Charles Winchester, former CEO of Global Financial Solutions, one of the very board members who had voted to destroy their father's career. "Please." His voice cracked over the speakerphone. "We'll do anything. The entire eastern seaboard is dark. We need your help." Zara, who had rarely spoken during their years of exile, addressed him firmly. "Then you know what we require, Mr. Winchester. Public accountability. Today. No exceptions." Within hours, news channels began broadcasting a remarkable sight. Charles Winchester, still wearing his $1,000 suit, knelt before cameras in front of his company's headquarters. His voice shook as he confessed years of financial manipulation, resource hoarding, and deliberate suppression of sustainable technologies that could have prevented the current crisis. "We were wrong," he declared, tears streaming down his face. "We chose profit over people, power over principle. I personally voted to destroy Samuel Reed's life because his ethics threatened our control. I humbly ask forgiveness, and I surrender all assets to humanitarian relief." He was only the first. Throughout the day, more former executives and political elites came forward. Some had to be helped to their knees due to age or illness, but each one knelt, literally and symbolically, laying down their pride and power. Maria, listening to the audio descriptions of these events, reached for Faith's hand. "Dad always said true leadership requires true humility. They're finally learning what he tried to teach them years ago." The sisters worked tirelessly, coordinating aid deployment as each confession was made. Their organization's systems, built over years of careful preparation, began stabilizing critical infrastructure. Hospitals regained power. Food distribution networks reopened. Communication systems were restored. By evening, the scene repeated across every major city. Powerful figures who had once sneered at Samuel Reed's choices now knelt in public squares, surrendering their authority to his daughter's wisdom. Their organization's protocols ensured every confession was followed by concrete action: the transfer of resources, the resignation of corrupt boards, the implementation of ethical oversight. Emery, monitoring the global response through her specialized computer interface, reported the impact. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. People are calling it the Great Humbling. They're saying this is what true leadership looks like. As night fell again, the sisters gathered in their father's hospital room. Samuel remained unconscious, but the doctors reported his vital signs were stable. Faith gently adjusted his blanket, remembering all the times he had covered them when they fell asleep during late-night study sessions. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We found a way to help without compromising our principles, just like you taught us." Lena, who had been watching the latest news coverage on her tablet, turned to her sisters with tears in her eyes. "Look at this." The video showed thousands of people gathered in city centers worldwide, holding candles and singing hymns of gratitude. Many held signs reading, "Thank you, Reed Sisters," and "Mercy triumphs over judgment." But most touching were the signs that simply said, "Samuel Reed was right." Maria smiled softly, hearing the description of the scenes. The world wasn't ready for Dad's vision back then, but they're ready now. Their phones continued to buzz with more requests for aid, more powerful figures ready to kneel and confess. The sisters knew their work was just beginning. But as they sat together in the quiet hospital room, watching over their father, they felt the rightness of their decision. They had chosen the harder path: mercy over vengeance, restoration over retribution. The Great Humbling, as people were calling it, marked more than just a transfer of power. It represented the triumph of Samuel Reed's greatest lesson, that true leadership begins with a humble heart and serves with unwavering ethical conviction. His daughters had learned that lesson well, and now they were teaching it to the world. The first signs of Samuel's awakening came on a quiet Wednesday morning. His fingers twitched slightly, and his breathing changed rhythm. The nurse on duty immediately notified the Reed sisters, who had maintained a constant rotation at the hospital despite their humanitarian work. Amani was the first to notice his eyes flutter open. She squeezed his hand gently, careful of the IV lines. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Can you hear me?" Samuel's eyes focused slowly, taking in the familiar face of his eldest daughter. A weak smile formed on his lips as he managed a slight nod. The doctor had warned them that stroke recovery would be gradual, but seeing recognition in his eyes brought immediate relief. Throughout the day, each sister took turns sitting with him, sharing the extraordinary events of the past few days. Keisha's interpreter helped her tell about the public confessions through sign language, her hands moving expressively as she described the scenes of powerful figures kneeling in surrender. "You should have seen them, Dad." Keisha signed, her face animated. "All those people who once looked down on us, literally bringing themselves low. But we didn't crush them. We helped them stand back up." Maria sat close to his bed, her voice soft but strong as she explained their decision-making process. "We remembered everything you taught us about ethical leadership," she said. "About how true strength lies in mercy, not vengeance. When they came begging for help, we chose to be better than what broke you." Samuel's eyes welled with tears as he listened, though he could only manage weak squeezes of their hands in response. Zara showed him news footage on her tablet, her voice steady as she narrated the global response to their organization's aid efforts. "The systems we built together," she explained. "They're saving millions of lives. Every protocol, every ethical framework you helped us develop, it's all working exactly as you envisioned." Lena brought reports of the infrastructure restoration, reading statistics that showed how their emergency response networks had prevented total collapse in major cities. "Remember all those late nights you spent helping me understand complex systems?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't just about the mechanics, it was about serving people. We finally understood." Faith, the youngest, curled up in the chair beside his bed and read him messages of gratitude pouring in from around the world. "They're calling it the Great Humbling," she said softly. "But really, it's your vision coming to life, Dad. Everything you sacrificed for, it wasn't in vain." Emery used her specialized computer interface to show him real-time data of their aid distribution networks. "Look at these patterns, Dad," she said excitedly. "Remember when you taught me about logistics using my toy blocks? Now we're moving actual resources, helping actual people, and it all started with you believing in us." As evening approached, Samuel managed his first weak words. "Outside. Please." The sisters exchanged glances, then quickly arranged with the medical staff to move him. They carefully wheeled his bed onto the hospital's rooftop garden, positioning him where he could watch the sunset. The sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and purples, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Samuel's voice was barely above a whisper, but his words carried clearly to his gathered daughters. "My work is finished." Tears flowed freely as the 7 women surrounded his bed, each touching him gently, a hand on his shoulder, fingers intertwined with his, a soft kiss on his forehead. They understood the depth of what he meant. His greatest work hadn't been building corporate empires or accumulating wealth. It had been raising them, teaching them, preparing them for this very moment. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rooftop garden as they sat together in peaceful silence. No words were needed. The world below was changing, healing, rebuilding, all because one man had chosen love over power, service over dominance, and faith over fear. Samuel's eyes drifted closed, a contented smile on his face. His daughters remained gathered around him, their presence a living testament to the power of compassionate leadership. As twilight settled over the city, the quiet moment held all the victory they had ever needed, not in headlines or accolades, but in the simple peace of knowing they had fulfilled their father's greatest hopes. The last rays of sunlight painted the sky in gentle hues, a fitting backdrop to the quiet culmination of Samuel Reed's life work. His daughters, once abandoned and overlooked, now stood as pillars of mercy and wisdom in a world desperate for both. In that peaceful moment, as day transformed into evening, they were simply a family, bound together by love, purpose, and the enduring legacy of their father's sacrifice. The weeks following Samuel's passing unfolded like gentle waves, each one bringing new signs of healing to a wounded world. In their modest headquarters, a renovated warehouse with wheelchair-accessible workstations, the seven sisters continued their father's work with quiet determination. Amani sat at her desk one morning, reviewing progress reports from 37 different countries. Supply chains were stabilizing, emergency food distribution networks were running smoothly, healthcare systems were being rebuilt with new fail-safes and ethical guidelines. She smiled softly, remembering how Samuel had taught her to look beyond numbers to see the human impact of every decision. "Look at this," Maria called from her station, where she managed their organization's ethical oversight. "Another corporation has voluntarily adopted our transparency protocols." She wheeled herself over to show Amani the document. "Remember when Dad told us that true change would come from example, not force?" Keisha's hands moved rapidly as she signed to her interpreter during a video conference with international aid coordinators. Their model of inclusive leadership had become the new standard, with disability access requirements now built into every reconstruction project. Samuel's vision of leadership through service was reshaping how the world viewed ability and power. In the logistics center, Emery worked with her specialized computer interface, coordinating relief efforts across 5 continents. Her systems, born from Samuel's patient teaching and her unique way of seeing patterns, had become the backbone of global emergency response. "We're reaching 98% efficiency in distribution," she announced proudly to her sisters. "Dad would love these numbers." Zara, once nearly silent, now led their public communications team. She kept their message consistent and humble, declining countless requests for magazine covers and television appearances. "We're not celebrities," she would explain firmly. "We're servants." It was exactly what Samuel had taught them, that true leadership seeks results, not recognition. Lena managed their education initiatives, implementing programs that combined technical skills with ethical principles. "Every student learns about accessibility and inclusion," she explained during a board meeting. "Just like Dad taught us that everyone has value, everyone has something to contribute." Faith, working with their community outreach programs, continued gathering stories of lives changed and systems reformed. She documented everything meticulously, building an archive not of their achievements, but of the ripple effects of compassionate leadership. 3 months after Samuel's passing, the sisters gathered in their meeting room, surrounded by reports and data screens. The global financial system had stabilized. Food security had been restored in most regions. Their emergency response networks had prevented countless deaths, but none of them spoke about these successes. Instead, they shared memories of quiet moments with their father, lessons learned over dinner, late-night conversations about ethics, his patient smile when they struggled to understand complex concepts. "He never wanted recognition," Maria reminded them softly. "He just wanted us to help people." The day of Samuel Reed's memorial service dawned clear and crisp. The sisters had chosen a modest venue, the same church where he had first learned about the care facility where they lived. People came from around the world, not to mourn a fallen CEO, but to honor a man who had chosen love over power. The service was broadcast globally, not because the sisters wanted attention, but because the world needed to understand Samuel's true legacy. Instead of eulogies about business success, they shared stories of lives transformed. A young girl in Africa who received life-saving medicine through their distribution network. A community in Asia rebuilt using their inclusive design principles. A South American town that had avoided famine thanks to their early warning systems. One by one, the sisters spoke about their father. Not about the wealthy executive who had adopted them, but about the man who had taught them that true wealth lay in service to others. They spoke of his patience, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in their potential. Keisha signed her testimony, her movements graceful and powerful. He taught us that our disabilities weren't weaknesses. They were different ways of seeing the world, different ways to help others. Amani spoke of his courage in choosing them over his career. He showed us that sometimes the most powerful leadership means walking away from power. Maria shared how he had taught them ethical decision-making. Every choice we make affects real people. He never let us forget that. Emery explained how he had helped her translate her unique understanding of patterns into systems that now saved lives daily. He saw possibilities where others saw limitations. Zara, her voice strong and clear, described how he had given them not just a home, but a purpose. He taught us that every person has value, every voice matters. Lena spoke about his vision of inclusive leadership. He believed that true strength comes from lifting others up, not standing above them. Faith, the youngest, concluded with a simple truth. Our father's legacy isn't measured in dollars lost, but in lives saved, in systems reformed, in hope restored. As the service concluded, the sisters sat together in the front row, holding hands. On screens throughout the venue, numbers scrolled silently. Not profit margins or stock prices, but statistics that told the real story of Samuel Reed's legacy. Number of lives saved through their emergency response networks. Number of communities rebuilt using inclusive design principles. Number of children now receiving education through their accessible learning programs. Number of corrupt systems reformed through their ethical oversight protocols. The final number appeared: 7. 7 once-forgotten girls who, through one man's love and sacrifice, had become architects of global change. 7 sisters who carried forward their father's vision of compassionate leadership. 7 women who proved that true power lies not in what you gain, but in what you give. As the gathering dispersed, the sisters remained seated, their hands still clasped together. They didn't need to speak. They knew their work would continue, guided by their father's principles and powered by their love for him and for the world he had taught them to serve. Through the church's windows, sunlight streamed in, illuminating the simple plaque they had chosen to honor Samuel Reed. It bore no mention of his corporate success or financial achievements. Instead, it carried the words he had lived by and taught his daughters. True leadership is measured not in what you take, but in what you give. Not in who you command, but in who you lift up. Through the large windows of the newly rebuilt community center, sunlight streamed across polished floors where children played. Their laughter echoed through halls that just months ago had stood empty and broken. Now the space buzzed with purpose and hope. Supply trucks moved with clockwork precision, their routes optimized by systems Emery had designed. Volunteers efficiently distributed food, medicine, and building materials to those in need. The chaos of the global crisis had given way to ordered compassion. In the center's main hall, Maria stood before a gathering of community leaders, her voice gentle but firm as she led them in prayer. Let us remember that our strength comes not from power, but from how we use it to serve others, she said, her words carrying to every corner of the room. Nearby, Amani addressed a group of young leaders in training, her wheelchair positioned at the front of the classroom. "They told us we couldn't lead," she said, her eyes bright with conviction. "They said our disabilities made us weak, but true leadership isn't about physical strength, it's about moral courage." The 7 sisters stood together, watching their vision unfold. They remembered the mockery, the headlines, the cruel dismissals. Now those same critics sought their guidance. Nations followed their example. Companies restructured according to their ethical frameworks. As they joined hands, they understood what their father had known all along, that true power was born not from dominance, but from compassion. And mercy, when chosen freely, had indeed reshaped history. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.